So my name is Marcia Bencala, and I am a licensed prayer practitioner at the Center for Spiritual Living in San Jose, and I'm very honored to be here. I love Reverend Abigail, and I love to see what she's doing here, and the expansion that is happening, I guess actually literally. For those of you that are here for the first time, I think I'm standing where a wall used to be like just a couple of weeks ago, right? Yeah, it's amazing. So in 2016, the Centers for Spiritual Living globally set an annual theme, which is the global vision, a world that works for everyone. And then they set monthly themes, and I thought I'd read it to you. It is Awakening to Your Spiritual Magnificence. But they gave us a whole paragraph to read. So let me read this to you. The February theme is, we envision humanity awakening to its spiritual magnificence and discovering the creative power of thought. A world where every person discovers his or her own personal power and ability to create an individual life that works within a world that works for everyone. And of course, then they give us a weekly theme to support that. The weekly theme is a quote by Ernest Holmes, who is the founder of the Science of Mind philosophy. And what he says, and this is what my message will be about, is that we believe in the incarnation of spirit in everyone, and that all people are the incarnations of the one spirit. So I myself, I actually like the word embodiment better than incarnation. So let me translate that for you. We are all the embodiment of spirit, no matter what, no exceptions. And all of us are individualized embodiments of one spirit. So a friend of mine told me that I should be talking about Super Bowl Sunday today and giving you analogies related to that. And actually, that isn't me. But I do know that it's a big commemorative holiday internationally today. So I thought maybe I could find another day that we celebrated this past week and talk about that. And actually I did, one that is much more me. And that is February 2nd, Groundhog Day. So I can talk about Groundhog Day. And so for those of you that might not know what that is, it's kind of a farmer's almanac thing where a groundhog's supposed to come out of his hole on February 2nd, and if he sees his shadow, then there's going to be 6 more weeks of winter. And if he doesn't see his shadow, then there's going to be an early spring. But actually what this reminded me of is a movie that came out in 1993 called Groundhog Day. So how many of you know that movie? Okay, so most of you. Let me take you through it again. So there's Phil, who's a kind of a grumpy person. He's the meteorologist, the Rita, who's the anchor woman, and then there's Larry, who's the cameraman. And the 3 of them have been assigned to go to Puxatawny, say that 5 times in a row, Puxatawny, Pennsylvania, which is a real place, and they celebrate Groundhog Day. Well, they were scheduled to go there and report on the Groundhog Day festivities, which they did. Phil thought it was the stupidest thing in the world. So all he wanted to do when he was done was leave, head back to Pittsburgh. But what happened is that a blizzard hit. So they had to turn around, go into a motel, and spend the night there, right? I can see nodding heads. Everybody knows what happens next, pretty much. What happens is he wakes up the next morning at 6 in the morning. He starts moving through his day, and lo and behold, he starts to realize, oh my gosh, I've been here before. This is yesterday. But he's the only one who's feeling that. Nobody else is feeling that. It's just kind of going on like it was before. So he spends the night again, wakes up the next morning at 6. And the same thing happens. So this starts happening to him over and over. So it's kind of like being on a treadmill, right? Have any of you ever felt like you were on a treadmill? Well, he certainly was. But then he started to get really into this, and he decided he could take advantage of this because he knew what was going to happen that day. So he starts seducing women, and he steals money, and he drives his car recklessly, but he can't do anything to end that day. So now he gets really desperate. He gets really desperate, and he decides the only thing he can do is kill the groundhog, kill himself, and maybe February 2nd will end. So he does that. He captures the groundhog, he steals a truck, he drives himself over a cliff, he kills himself, he kills the groundhog, and the very next day, it's February 2nd again. So he continues this. He keeps trying to kill himself and get rid of this loop that he's in. But at the same time, his heart starts to soften. He starts realizing that this knowledge that he has about that day could actually be used to help people. So he starts helping the townspeople, and he saves lives. And he also starts feeling warm affection for Rita, who isn't interested in him at all at this point. But it makes him want to better himself. So he takes French lessons and piano lessons and learns to sculpt ice, right? But nothing ends that day. And he gets so desperate that at one point he actually tells Rita what's going on. And what he says at this point, when he's at his lowest, he says, "I've killed myself so many times, I don't even exist anymore." He also says, "I've come to the end of me. There's no way out." What he doesn't realize is that by ending his old self, he's actually finding his way out. So he and Rita develop more affection for each other. And lo and behold, when they declare their love, the next morning he wakes up at 6 a.m, and now it's February 3rd. So he got out of his loop. So there's many ways to look at this movie. The Buddhists look at it as a movie about forgiveness and selflessness. I also read that the Catholics like to think of it as a story about purgatory, which it is, right? We don't believe in purgatory, a separate place called hell, but we do believe that you can create your own purgatory. So, and that's exactly what Phil did over and over and over again. So how would we interpret this from a New Thought perspective? So Phil himself, first of all, he was very negative. He believed he was separate, right, from everybody else. And so he took his own personal power and tried to control his existence. But he found himself in this loop over and over again. And it took him to getting to the point where he couldn't go on anymore to actually want to become somebody else, which propelled him to become somebody new. And he started to wake to his spiritual nature, right? He awoke to his kindness and his goodness, and that is what got him through. So let me go back to our theme. Our theme is that we are the embodiment of spirit, always. We are spirit in form. And that is exactly what happened to Phil, is he ignited that spark within him that is spirit, that we all have, right? He ignited that, and once he did that, he allowed spirit to flow through him, and his life totally changed. Ernest Holmes puts it this way, and I'm going to quote from the Science of Mind textbook. "When we learn to trust the universe, we shall be happy, prosperous, and well. God is always God. No matter what our emotional storm or what our objective situation may be, there is always something hidden in the inner being that has never been violated. We may stumble, but always there is that eternal voice forever whispering within our ear, that thing which causes the eternal quest, that thing which forever sings and sings." So do you hear that voice? Even if you think you don't, you do. Every time you see a sunset that just inspires you. Or when a child that you love comes to you and gives you a hug and you feel that love. Or when there's a piece of music that you just are so in love with the harmony and the melody. All of that is spirit speaking to you. It is that spirit, that inner voice that we like to say is closer to you than your hands and feet. And so when we recognize that our source is spirit, we awaken to the nature of God, because our nature is God's nature. We are joy, love, perfection, wholeness, harmony, intelligence. That is who we are. That is our spirit in form. So, that is what Phil did. He awakened to himself. And to be honest, the thing that you have to realize is that there's not a God out there. There's a God within. And the only way that spirit can operate for us is by operating through us. And the important thing to also remember is we have another principle that we believe, which is that we are never separate from spirit. No matter what you do, how you do it, you are never separate. So another way to look at this is that this spirit within is always a part of us. And Voltaire likes to think of God as a circle, and he talks about this infinite God where every center point is a point of God in being. And there's infinite points, so there's no circumference within this circle. So we can never be separate. Another quote by Holmes, this is from the Beverly Hills lecture, is this: "Our point of contact with divine mind as divine presence is always at the center of our being, through our own being, and proceeding from it. Our being is merely a point where the infinite being, like a wave of the ocean, comes into self-expression and self-experience." Phil believed himself to be separate. He was a wave with no God, right? And I think, can you even mention the wave? I love this analogy. I love this analogy of the wave. Because it reminds me that even though sometimes I dip into my humanness, you know what I mean? For me, my humanness is when I go to that place of saying, okay, I'm not good enough, or I'm not going to have enough money for retirement, and I ruminate about all these things. When we dip into that, we're succumbing to the belief that we are separate, that we're a wave separate from the ocean. So what do I mean by this? Bear with me. I want to go into this because it's this analogy that really came home to me, which really made me recognize and understand that I can be this thing, this body, and yet be spirit, and not disconnected from that which we call spirit or God. So think about it this way. If you think of a wave, right, you can see it in the ocean. But a wave is finite, right? It's impermanent. And a wave arises because the ocean exists. In other words, without the ocean, there would be no wave. A wave is also a phenomenon that appears at certain points, but the ocean is always there. So a wave is this self-expression of the ocean. The ocean is permanent. You can think of it as a substratum or a foundation. The water of the wave is the same as the water of the ocean, right? The substance is the same, no matter what. We can have different waves, like we can have different people with different sizes and shapes, but our substance is the same. So the water of the wave is the same as the water of the ocean. So from a spiritual standpoint, what we know is that there is one spirit. And within this one spirit, there are not all these separate spirits walking around, right? We are the embodiment of the ocean, of God, and our nature is the same as that of God. Okay, what's the benefit for believing all of this? I've had so much happen in my life. The more and more I practice, and this is a daily practice, it helps you move through your life. And you start seeing ways in which Spirit is moving through your life in spite of all appearances. You can see the harmony there. So I thought I'd give you 2 examples. These are real examples. I have a friend who in the last recession lost his job. And for about 6 months, he was pretty destitute. He was on the verge of being homeless because he had lost everything. And what that meant was that, he couldn't get sick. He had no health insurance. His car couldn't break down, right? Because he had no money to pay for it. But eventually he did get a job. And when he got his first paycheck, he was so excited, right? He had it now. He was back on track. He had this money he could put in the bank. Well, kind of like Phil, he ended up in a little bit of a loop. What happened the next morning is his car broke down. So his first reaction was, oh man, here I am. I can't get a break. I had no money. I got a job. I had a paycheck. And now I have to go and spend all that money on my car. That's one way of looking at it. But he was practicing this philosophy. And he realized that that wasn't the way to look at it. So he learned, as he thought about this, is that during this period of time when he had no money, his car ran. His car ran so that he could go from interview to interview to interview to get that job. And it wasn't until he had the money ready in his hand that his car broke down and he had the means to pay for it. So you see what I mean? How you can see Spirit actually moving through your life, supporting you as you allow it to open and let it flow in spite of the appearances. Now, I'm going to give you a very personal example. I'm going through it right now. We'll see if I can get through this. On January 5th, my mother, who's 88, fell and broke her leg. And we spent the first week in the hospitals with doctors deciding that she shouldn't have surgery, that really what they wanted to do was see if her leg would heal by itself. And they decided that she needed to go to rehab until she could actually put weight on her leg. And she actually went home yesterday. So she's been in rehab for about 4 months. But 1 week after my mother fell and broke her leg, my father, who's 87, collapsed in their home. And he was able to move to the bedroom door and open it, where my nephew, who was living with them, it was the early morning, discovered him. My nephew then called 911. They sent him to El Camino Hospital in Los Gatos, where they decided they didn't have the right equipment for him if he was having a heart attack. So then they sent my father to Good Samaritan Hospital in San Jose, where they did tests, and then they decided that, no, it wasn't a heart attack, no, it wasn't a stroke. He was bleeding internally. And they didn't have the doctor to handle his case. So then they decided to transfer him to Kaiser Hospital. And it was probably that afternoon that, it kind of all came together for me. And I had this moment where I dropped into my humanness. And it was like, my mother just got out of the hospital into rehab. We don't know what this means for her. She's distraught. My father's in the hospital. I'm a ministerial student. I'm going to school. I'm also working. And it was like, what am I going to do with this? And as soon as I said that, I realized, yes, what am I going to do with this? We learned this here. I turned to Spirit. As a ministerial student, I should know that, right? You turn to spirit. And then what happened for me is I went inside and prayed. And I started to see the beauty and the harmony in this situation, believe it or not. So what happened is the day that my father fell, it was Martin Luther King Day. So it was a holiday, which meant that my nephew who lived with them was at home. Because on any other work day, he would have been gone, right? And I don't know how long my father would have been lying there. My nephew was extremely distraught. And the first thing he did was text me, my brother, and my sister. That's all he knew what to do. Well, it turns out all three of us were right there with our phones. And I was able to call him immediately, get him calmed down, and to remind him to call 911, which he did. The ambulance came quickly. Yes, then my father went from El Camino Hospital to Good Samaritan Hospital to Kaiser, where he wasn't a member. But throughout all of that, even my father says I was in the right place at the right time. I went from where I was going to where I needed to be. The other beautiful thing is that Kaiser, even though my father wasn't a member, I cannot say enough about them. There was no question. They admitted him, they got him assigned a doctor, and they gave him such beautiful recovery services. I can't say enough. In addition to this, my sister, who lives in Santa Rosa, had already planned to come down that day to spend with my mother. And how brilliant was that? How spiritual was that? Because my mother was sitting in rehab, thinking that her husband was dying, right? And we needed my sister to be there with her. The other thing that happened is my brother, who lives in Concord and never comes down this way, except for birthdays, right? He was over at Evergreen Community College, which is in East San Jose. He was there. He was there so that both my brother and I could deal with my father. So you see, in spite of appearances, I know that we are spirit in form. I know that when we practice this and we allow things to flow through us instead of us trying to control our lives, spirit works for us and we can see it. We can see it if we just step back. We are spirit in form. So let me close by something that I saw posted by Reverend Dr. Vion, who's the spiritual director at the Center for Spiritual Living in Santa Rosa. So we all probably have heard this. We know we're not human beings having a human experience, right? Often we say we are spiritual beings having a human experience. But Dr. Edward posed this question. He said, no. We're not divine and human. What if we're actually spiritual beings having a spiritual experience right here, right now? For if God is infinite, and I know God is infinite, then God is present in this room. God is present in this room, right here, right now. Let's pray. So take a deep breath in and release it. And know with me in this moment that there is only one life, one love, one intelligence, one spirit. And in this moment, I choose to call that God, the invisible and visible, that which is the ocean, eternal, everlasting, the source of all life. I know that we each are an individualized, unique, magnificent expression of spirit. And I know that we live because it is life that lives through us. And I know that we think because it is wisdom and intelligence that thinks through us. And I know that we love because it is divine love that fully embraces us, loves us, guides us, guards us, protects us unconditionally. And for that I give thanks. I am so thankful for this moment, for the presence of the divine that shows up in the way that the planets move around the sun, that shows up in every blade of grass, that shows up as you and me, as spirit in form. And with this gratitude, I surrender and let God be God. Speaking these words, this prayer, I release these words into the action of the law, into the action of the true doer, God itself, whatever you want to call it. And so I anchor this prayer in truth. And so it is.